On this episode of The Badge and Beyond, we may be discussing domestic violence, mental health issues, suicide, and self-harm.
If you would like support and someone to talk to, the right avenues in your local area would be appreciated for you to have a look at those options. Please make use of avenues such as Lifeline on 13 11 14 and also for domestic violence hotline 1-800 RESPECT. So viewer and listening discretion is advised. Welcome everybody to The Badge and Beyond. This is Danny and Anthony.
That's a good start. We remembered our names.
We remembered our names, we're done. So today we're going to speak about young offenders. Bit topical, and the good thing is you and I have both had a fair bit of experience in this space.
Not as young offenders, I might add.
No, but definitely working with young offenders in different spheres. So I'd like to hear your views in terms of young offenders, the age of dolly incapacts, what that is.
Yeah. I think, look, the current talk is obviously, and look, let's start by saying that we got asked to discuss this, and I think it's kind of topical and important that people understand the process from the law enforcement side.
Yeah.
The thing to remember is that we're not just out, or police aren't just out grabbing kids and throwing them into prison. That just doesn't happen. And probably should more often than it does, if we're being honest. So we've got to understand the process first. There's a lot of people that don't understand how the Young Offenders Act works and how people are brought into how young offenders are put before the court. So first of all, we've got to talk about a thing called dolly incapacts, which is effectively saying that between the ages of 10 and 14, well, let me start by saying, first of all, that under the age of 10, you're below the age of criminal responsibility.
And this is New South Wales,
This
right?
is New South Wales. Yeah. So it might be slightly different in other jurisdictions, but it's going to be relatively the same, I think. But in New South Wales, under the age of 10, you can't be criminally charged because the law regards the mind of a child to be unable to determine that what they're doing is criminally wrong or seriously wrong, knowing that it had greater implications than just being a bit naughty, if that makes sense. Now, between 10 and 14, they can commit criminal acts, but the onus is on police or the prosecuting body to prove that they knew what they did was a criminal offence. And then once you do that, or when they've committed criminal acts, there's a number of hoops that police jump through. So the options available when you're prosecuting a child for an offence would be things like what they call a warning. Yeah. So very, very casual, kind of you see someone doing something wrong on the street, like a summary kind of offence, and you just give them a warning there and then. It could be a caution, and usually there's 3 or 4 cautions that children have to go through first, where they sit down with police, get brought in the police station with a member of their family or something, or a guardian, and they get spoken to about what they've done and how it was criminally wrong and how important it is to not break the law and their social responsibilities and the impacts on different people. And then there is a conference after that.
Yep.
At another stage. So a conference can be for a separate offence where you'll have the victim come in, you might have the police there, you have guardians there, you might have members of the school and whatnot. There's different formats it can take. But that's really talking to that young offender about the acts they've committed and why the wider impacts and helping them understand that. So between that age of 10 and 14, dolly incapacts is basically saying we've got to prove that the child knew what they were doing was criminally wrong. And part of that proof is often, hey, they've been warned, they've had multiple cautions, they've had a conference, etc. And then they get charged and put before the court for, the youth courts. However, the magistrate in the children's court can still say, you know what, they need to go back and get a conference, or they need to go back and have a caution, which is predominantly one of the main things they instigate.
Well, they're always looking for an alternative to the court system.
That's right, an alternative to imprisoning a child. And then only at the very highest end do you see children being put into juvenile detention centres here in New South Wales. And even then, the juvenile detention centre, while it is a correctional facility, isn't run by New South Wales Corrective Services, has a bunch of different policies, protocols and standards. And in all honesty, a lot of the people I saw that were in there weren't really complaining. They had access to, like, you know, PlayStation and things like that. Some of them were actually found it safer than being at home. And, you know, it's daunting and it's not nice, but it's for some of them, it's almost a better option than being on the street. So when you see different media outlets or different political organisations saying, oh, you know, they've just thrown a kid in jail. No, that in New South Wales at least, children aren't just getting grabbed off the street and locked up for vandalism and things like that. There's a series of hoops that police jump through.
And I think, you know, you raise a good point in terms of, you know, the context of what juvenile detention looks like. And it is a sad reality that for some of these kids, they are kind of more protected if they are incarcerated in that facility because of how dangerous the home situation is, or life on the street might be, or depending what's happening for that child at that time. And I think that's the spirit of the legislation around the Young Offenders Act, was so that it's more about rehabilitative, more about preventative, more an intervention strategy as opposed to a punishment.
Yes.
You know, punitive kind of measures. And if we look at the kind of some offences, you actually can't go that pathway. You will skip and go, and
that's right.
You'll go through the normal sort of adult court process if there's serious offences, and especially also in terms of domestic violence, you will skip warnings and cautions in that space. When I spent a number of years looking after the youth liaison officers, the school liaison police, and I was quality reviewing youth-related events in that space, and then I'd go out to the schools and you know, do different talks and different interventions. And it really is based on context, because there are, you know, some young offenders were, I don't know if I can call them the spawn of evil, but there were some really significant, very serious criminals here that harmed a lot of people, did very serious adult crimes. Yeah. But then you also had a significant cohort were a victim of their life. Like their parents weren't really parents, and they were living in really disturbing circumstances, and they were psychologically affected by the way they were raised and doing different things. I mean, I remember a particular call I got from the dock. So where we were, you know, the cells were downstairs in the station, and the custody officer called me because I had a young offender brought in, and I needed to come and sort of review the report before they could, you know, continue with the charging process. And I'd come downstairs and seen this young girl at the time. I think she would have been, she was over the age of Dolly Inkip. I think she was like 15, 14, along those lines. But she'd been done shoplifting. So I'm walking, looking through the report, and I see her sitting there. I recognise her. I've seen her before in the streets, and I've known of her for a few years. And I know the backstory, because I was involved in the backstory of charging her other family members who basically attacked her with baseball bats and broke her legs, right? Serious domestic violence. And because she'd given evidence in court against her own family members, they threw her out. Right? No one cares that her so-called brother and at the order of their dad broke her legs. Right? So she had nowhere to stay, so she ended up living with an uncle or something like that. But she found herself quite homeless most of the times. And when I asked the officer in charge, what did she steal? She'd stolen some undergarments for her size, bread, and Nutella. And I'm like, we got to look beyond this, right? I had a chat to that officer, and I'm like, all right, what does this tell you? Or what is she actually stealing? This is not stealing to sell on the black market or do whatever. This is for her to eat and to wear. She didn't steal designer stuff, right? And it was like, we need to sort of try to stop this cycle.
And that was as simple as just saying, okay, take her out, warning and help connecting her with a service.
That's right.
So she could get those things.
Exactly right.
Rather than going straight to charge.
Yep. Exactly. And that's sort of the thing where you can see where the Young Offenders Act comes to play.
Yeah.
Because it gives you that discretion. It's not the kind of thing you could do, say, with an adult.
Yeah.
You catch an adult shoplifting. Again, you'd be hard pressed trying to work around the legislation that you've got. Where here and rightly so, there should be an opportunity to intervene.
Yeah. And I think, look, the society as a whole needs a way to deal and manage with juveniles that are offending. And you need to understand that, look, psychopaths were young ones too, right? There are just some people in this world that are bad. Unspeakable evil walks among us at times. And I'm not saying that is the greater percentage of people, but I'm saying there is an element and you need to be able to deal with that. And so we need to have both the opportunity to pull children out of a pathway they're on and help, change their life and enrich their life and make them better members of the community. We also need to have a way to keep the community safe. And so my point of view is I personally think that the system's pretty good. Should there be more? Could it do with more funding? Yes. Could the agencies have more resources? And should there be a little bit more focus on parenting and things like that at times? Yes, 100%. Should we increase the age of criminal responsibility? I don't think so. I think in the digital age that we're in, my personal opinion is that, look, children have more access to information than they've ever had, more access to outside role models, whether they're right or wrong, with all the influences and the people around them, and different organisations trying to, capture children before they fall through the cracks. However, look, I think we've got a fairly good balance with the conferencing and the cautions and everything else. But I know you've seen it, I know I've seen it, where there are just some really bad kids. And that offending starts so early. I've seen it start before 10 years old. And look, they become a permanent harassing factor for the community. And as a police force, you need to be able to do something. You need to have an alternative to work with them. Now, I'm a big proponent that there's a lot of factors that go into juvenile delinquency. Any of the forensic psychology or criminology work will point out that, look, people from disadvantaged homes, people with single parents, people from that lack education, that are in high crime environments, people with disability, learning disabilities and things like that, all these factors come together and create a sphere where it's much more likely that someone's going to offend. But there's also protective factors in that we can implement and help to prevent these kids going down that path. But once they've gone down that path to a certain point, there's still got to be an element where, hey, they've got to be put before the courts and they've got to be put in jail when they've committed wrong things, wrong acts. And as part of that, that will hopefully help to rehabilitate them and give them access to those things to get them on the right path. And I think that might be the point we're missing in that broader context of, hey, young offenders, and the age of criminal responsibility should be increased. No, I think sometimes putting them before the courts is the best way to get them on the right path to help them be a better member of the community.
I think the other issue is, like, what is age? Right?
Yeah.
And we're getting to the point where we really need to meet someone on their cognitive ability as well, right? So, and you've seen that the adults have the cognitive ability of a 6-year-old, right? You would not treat them the same way. So, I don't. Yeah, the argument for raising the age of criminal responsibility to me is flawed in that aspect that it should be based on what the person can actually comprehend. because otherwise it's inconsequential, regardless
Yeah.
if it becomes 12 or it's 11. Where we see, and even recently now, I've had the opportunity to consult on some work in the juvenile justice system on people like young people that proceed through with bail conditions or AVOs, and in interviewing these young people, hearing their side of what they understand their conditions to be and what they can't do and what they can do, and you really start to see it's not easy. It really isn't easy to navigate this pathway, especially if you don't have money.
This episode of the Badge and Beyond podcast is brought to you through the sponsorship of
IC Technology. You can find them on ictechnology.com.au for all things IT and cyber.
and Precision Integrity Services, who you can find at privateinvestigatorsydney.com.au. Yes.
Right. So, and which again, it's one of the
big factors.
One of the factors. So, you'll find there's an overrepresentation in young people of people with mental health issues, and also learning disabilities, behavioural issues,
Addiction.
Exactly. So then you've got all this, which is why you have that cohort in the juvenile justice system, which means you also can't have just broad brush policies that are going to work in each individual case. And then just in hearing how a child understands conditions, like one of the children I interviewed, like explained to me, like they had their bail papers, and I'm like, explain to me what your bail conditions mean. And they said, we had a non-association clause. I can't hang out with 1, 2, 3, 4 people. And I'm like, okay, who explained this to you the first time? And he goes, it was the police. He goes, but I don't remember it. When the police were explaining to me, and it was the first time he'd ever been in custody. So it's probably the most traumatic event this child ever had, and we're explaining legal jargon kind of thing to them, and who was with you, and it was some uncle or whatever. How often do you see that uncle? Yeah. Right. And it's just
And how much understanding does that uncle have of the law?
100%.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, you can go to court sometimes within a couple of weeks. Sometimes it's months and months down the track. And then as your conditions roll over, mate, you're not going to be thinking, especially if a co-offender messages you, and the instinct is just to reply, bang, you've breached your AVO or your bail, or there's all these other things that come into place. And I think what I saw with in the police when we were in the youth sort of area with the specialist specialist officer training for youth, and when you had to know the Young Offenders Act, a lot of it was tick and flick.
Yeah.
Right? Does it satisfy this offence? Yep. Did you give a caution? Yep. That's caution number 2, 1 more to go, for example.
Yeah.
What I liked about the conferences is that there's victim impact. And the young person gets to see from the other side. And sometimes you see that aha moment in that little circle, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you see nothing and it's terrible. There's no remorse, no nothing.
It's true.
And they're at each other. The hatred's still there and all this stuff's happening. But sometimes there is. And even in with the Indigenous population, with the Koori courts and different things, you also see the elders in the community coming in and sort of taking stock and let's understand the impact of what you have done here to someone else. And I think it's kind of a lot about that as well. But we also got to understand with the serious crimes, mate, they're recruited because of their age.
Yes. Yeah.
I know that if I can get him to be my runner, or they can deal the drugs, they can do whatever, they're going to come off with not so serious offences.
That's right.
And people are looking for kids of that age and they groom them for that purpose. Yep. So there's a lot of things that the wider community doesn't see that's being used in the young offender space, and you have to have that understanding to know how to tackle it.
And I think you raise a really good point there, and what I was thinking about is I was thinking about the number of times I've worked in custody and you have a child come in and, you call mum and dad.
Yeah.
They don't come, they're not answering.
Yeah.
You end up getting someone from the salvos to come in and they've never met this child.
Yeah.
They don't have any legal training, and you're trying to explain it to the child, you're trying to explain it to the person from the salvos, and there are safeguards in place. Don't think that when the children go into jail, in the police complex, oftentimes if they're in a dock where we keep criminals, the doors left open for them, and depending on the risk factor, like sometimes they're out in a room out the front, like an interview room, just with a police officer sitting with them, so they're not actually in the custody area. But there are some of those safeguards, and you've got to have an adult with them. But sometimes you can't find an adult. You know, when it's 3 a.m. in the morning and they're from a broken family and mum and dad aren't any better off, and you're calling, like you say, an uncle, and sometimes, you know, the whole family's illiterate.
Yeah.
How do they know what you're talking about, you know? And there's, like, you know, juvenile legal service, but of course they close at a certain point in time. They don't just have solicitors that can come out and...
But then you got the challenge, you got to admit the offence.
That's right, yeah.
Right? So, you know, imagine you're in a situation where normally a lawyer would tell you, be quiet, right? Don't say anything. Yeah, here, if they admit the offence, it opens up these alternatives.
Yeah.
If they don't, we're going to court.
That's right. And that's one of the hard things, is trying to... some of these kids from these homes where there's a significant criminal element have been told, you never talk to the cops, and you're like, yeah, but I can get you out here, right? Like, you can be doing yourself a disservice by not talking to us. And I remember kind of having that conversation where you speak to juvenile legal aid and you're like, just so you know, this is kind of like their second caution they're coming up for. It's not a big thing. You know, they've been quite cooperative.
Yep.
But they haven't admitted the offence. So maybe if you talk to your client, we can go down that path. Oh, okay, let me talk. And then the kids are like, yeah, I'm happy to do that.
They're good to speak to when it's juvenile legal aid, but sometimes you're speaking with private solicitors, and it's a bit different. Some are fantastic, and others will be like, he's saying nothing. And I'm like, dude.
Yeah, you're forcing my hand.
On CCTV, he's got the bottle, he's thrown it through the window.
Yes.
Right? It's him. Okay. You know, clean skin, first offence.
Yep.
He'll get his caution. No. And then it goes to the court, and the magistrate's like, why didn't it go to juvenile? Well, he didn't admit the offence. Yeah. And then you send it back.
Yeah. Like. And look, I think the frustration for the community is they're seeing these gangs of young kids getting around, getting locked up. And the frustration for police as well is you lock them up, you put them before the courts, they come out the very next day, same day, most of the time.
Yeah.
And they're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
I think about, we had one particular, when I first started in the cops, there was one particular kid, and look, his mum and dad were in jail. His grandparents had been in jail. And this kid was like, I think when we came across him, 9 or 10. But he was doing armed robberies. Like, he was holding up the video easy with a pair of scissors. And you know, you think, oh, surely not, it can't be. But he did not care. He would stab you, he'd punch you, he'd do whatever. Just completely off the rails. I remember we arrested him for something, brought him into an interview room, like out the front where he was supposed to, and he just kept trying to jump up and fight me. Yeah. To the point where I was like, okay, after he's tried to hit me that many times, I've just got to take him into the cells area, because I can't contain him. I can't stop him from leaving either, because the door's unlocked into the foyer. I remember we had to transport him into the city, and he wasn't allowed to be transported in the back of a police paddy wagon. Yeah. So we're sitting, there's 3 of us driving, one person's driving the police sedan, there's myself on one side, my partner on the other side, him in the middle, and we're trying to hold his arms, and because he wasn't allowed to be handcuffed, and he's like, I'm trying to put my foot on his foot, because he's trying to punch, kick, and elbow the whole way into this, and I could not believe, and no one had done anything to him from our perspective, is in that outside of arresting him, like he hadn't been locked up hard or done anything that kind of caused that, but he was just a bad guy. Now the funny thing is, 10 years later, his name popped up again for escaping police custody, assault police. I'd seen he was still doing armed robberies and stuff. He was just a really bad guy. And I think when you look at what's happening in Queensland and now happening here, is getting these kids sometimes out of displacing them from their friends, moving them out of that gang and being able to give them structure and break that cycle for 6 or 12 months. That could be the best thing we could do for some of those children. Yeah, and not all of them, but
that's
some
the thing. It needs that. I remember responding to, where teachers had been stabbed by the students, right, in primary school. Yeah. And you're like, this is how he starts? How is this going to end? Yeah. So there's some really serious crimes that can happen, and even children on much younger children. Yep. You know what I mean? And that, whether it's sexual assaults, whether it's serious physical assaults, it happens.
It does all manner of things. Everything from, and look, everything from murder to arson. I know we did an arson investigation. It was just a group of kids, and they burnt down a Coles, and they were all well-known troublemakers, and like it was more than $1 million worth of damage, just in one complex from doing one stupid thing, but. They did not care, and they were all from broken homes and bad families. And I think, as you know what you say about school teachers is, there's another reason why we need to have this Young Offenders Act working well, and that is that the people that serve the community, sooner or later, you're going to have people stop putting their hand up. Who wants to be a teacher if you go, hey, I could go to a school where I'm going to be harassed, stood over, and assaulted by the students? Who wants to be a police officer when you're like, well, every time I arrest a juvenile, he can punch me, kick me, bite me, spit on me, but he gets no punishment for that. Yeah. Same as nurses and AMBOs and, the whole gambit, even like fax workers who are trying to do the best and then they get abused, and juvenile detention officers, much the same thing. At some point in time, normal people don't want to be a part of that anymore. And so then we're actually decreasing the capability of society to respond.
It's very problematic because you'll find the most vocal people are on kind of social media, and they just, the armchair critics going, oh, look what you did, and, that's because they haven't seen how vicious some of this behaviour can be. It's, especially in education, especially the teachers, they're terrified of laying hands to restrain someone because they get all kinds of allegations on them and stuff. And it's not like classrooms have CCTV everywhere. Maybe they need to, but then people will say, "Oh, but then you're invading the privacy and you're seeing children." So it's not an easy solution. Not something we're going to solve right here. But I think because as you said, this question was sort of brought up with one of the listeners. It is something that there's a lot deeper and there's a lot of underlying issues, and it's not as simple as just raising the age that's going to solve it.
Yeah. And look, I think for many of the proponents who want to say, let's increase the age limit and, the poor little darlings, I'm like, there are many factors that go into this, but get out of your armchair, get on the streets, and go deal with these children face to face when they're behaving the way they are. And we're not talking about little kids. Teenagers are predominantly the issue. See what they're like with the police and the first responders and the people that are trying to help them. And with that full understanding of what may have driven them to that, there still needs to be some protections in place.
Yeah. But good questions, and keep the questions coming. We're happy to address, quality of questions in that caliber. That's absolutely for sure, good for us in that way. Reach out to us by commenting on the socials. Send us an email. Our website
is privateinvestigatorsydney.com.au.
Thank you for listening. See you next time.
Thank you. You bring out the worst in me,
I do.
I'm a sensible individual when you're not around.
That's true.
All right, talk to me.
Welcome, everybody, to the Badge and Beyond. Welcome, Anthony. Why are you laughing, bro?
Because you're a dick. Today you're with the Badge and Beyond with Moira. Now, have you seen the latest adult diaper? No.
that went to a weird place, bro.
That's the image I had in my head when you were...
Why is that the image you had in your head?
Because you remind me of Moira. Moira with a beard. Moira with a beard.